Welcome, everybody. Today, a very special guest, Michael Malice. He has very kindly chatted with me before, but we thought we'd do it here on the stream show, and we'll be, of course, watching you all on the restream and the Rumble Rants. You can find him at Michael Malice on Twitter, and Malice, of course, Malice. And his new book is called White Pill, A Tale of Good and Evil. He also has the Anarchist Handbook. Michael's a very well-known anarchist, and when I first heard him talk, I thought, oh, man, I don't like anarchists. And then I found him compelling, persuasive, thoughtful, and found myself agreeing with many things that he was saying. So that was a shock to me, and I think it's not too sort of presumptuous of me to say that we're sort of friendly now. And I like Michael, and I wanted him on this show, and so let's do it right now.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I strongly urge you to go get the White Pill. I also suggest the Anarchist Handbook. You should understand some of the ideas and thoughts that Michael has been putting forward, including the case for American secession, which got everybody rather excited. So let's bring Michael right onto the show. Michael, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's a pleasure.
It is my privilege, and thank you for doing this. So let's talk about the White Pill. Why would people buy this book?
Oh, well, I think one of the most important issues that has happened in your and my lifetimes and everyone else's lifetimes listening to this, for the most part, was the Cold War and the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. And at the same time, this is something that has completely vanished from popular consciousness. So there's a lot of talk from both political tribes about authoritarianism, totalitarianism. You know, Trump's literally Hitler. The Democrats want to do X, Y, and Z to your kids. And I realized that very few Americans know what these countries are really like. There is a very poor understanding in America of what evil is like, what totalitarianism and authoritarianism is like. I'm reminded of when Mike Bloomberg was mayor of New York City, and Mike Huckabee, who had been governor of Arkansas at the time, was complaining about him limiting the size of big gulps at 7-Eleven, saying this is just like North Korea. Listen, if the biggest problem in North Korea is that the cups of their sodas is too small, I mean, you are completely removed from reality. So I wanted to explain to people just how evil societies can become, but also illustrate why I am so hopeful for the future of this country, because this is an example where the victory over what Reagan correctly, in my view, called an evil empire was so quick, so sudden, and so total that the country itself no longer exists, and is in fact receded entirely from popular discussion and consciousness. And not only that, you and I and many people listening to this our families have come from this place. And it's important for us to remember what that actually meant in practice.
Right. That's what I wanted you to explain, why this is something that is particularly meaningful for you. And I've heard you talk to Lex Friedman about it. And at the same time, I wonder if you could sort of address that while we have no real sense of what that is actually like, would it not be accurate to say that the slide into it is through good intentions, controlling things like health and health emergencies? Is it not the case that if we're not careful, we head in that direction?
No, I don't think it's good intentions at all. I think good intentions are all predators, or not all predators. There's two types of predators. There's the chase predators, like a cheetah. You know, they run after their prey. But there's the ambush predators, like an anglerfish or chameleon or something like that. And I do think that it is a very useful technique if you're trying to pass in civil society as having good intentions, and that allows power-hungry people to get away with the worst atrocities. So no, but I do think the second part of what you said, yes, this is absolutely something to be extremely concerned about, and to demonstrate, you guys think it's bad that you have to, learn something stupid on TV. This is a drop in the bucket.
And explain your history, that why this is so pertinent for you specifically.
Well, I was born in the former Soviet Union. We emigrated here, when I was 1.5, 2 years old. And a previous book of mine, Dear Reader, was about North Korea, which is very much a relic of the Iron Curtain and the Soviet era. But I just also think it's important because it bothers me when people are kind of flipping out in the media and talking about how America's done, or this country has been destroyed, or this country's 2 years or one president away from being destroyed. I'm like, do you know how much further we have to go? Now, certainly that's the direction that many people in power would like us to go to. But the fact of the matter is, we are not there yet. And it behooves us all to ask why. If these people had their druthers, they would have absolute control. What is preventing this? And what would that look like if they got what they wanted?
Well, is what's preventing it? Well, now hold on, because we're going to go into really interesting territory here. Is what is preventing it the genius construction, the genius system that a group of white males constructed many years ago of checks and balances and certain kinds of constraints on power, and then the whole state system within that and the federalism that holds it kind of together? Is that not the constraint? Is that not what prevents it from getting there?
No, I don't think that's. I mean, that's not part of the book at all. Because I'll get to answering the question, and you answer your question in a second. Uh, the Soviet Union, I think, is unambiguously, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you realize this is, especially in contemporary times, malevolent and something to be avoided at all costs. Now, which party is going to get us to authoritarianism? Each is going to point the finger at the other. That's a separate issue. I do not think the Constitution has been an effective bulwark as much as it's proclaimed against government encroachment. It used to be a felony to explain to someone, even verbally, how to get prophylactics. There have been very few gun restrictions that have been struck down by the Supreme Court in the last century until very, very recently. So these are two very easy examples. And the reason checks and balances don't work is, why would I, as a president, nominate a Supreme Court justice who's going to restrict my power? And why would I, as a congressman, as a senator specifically, pass a Supreme Court justice that's going to restrict my power? All the incentives are in the other direction.
And yet, and so we've slid that way at times, and certainly maybe now, and yet we've managed not to go all the way. And are you saying that, what is that, the practice of democracy, as de Tocqueville called it? Is that an anachronism of the British institutions that we came from? What has held us back then?
I think it's civil society, which is precisely the non-political aspects of our country. I think it's American culture. I think it's American philosophy and the ideas that were behind the Constitution, which it tried to kind of invoke and implement. That to me is a far bigger bulwark against what you're describing than expecting Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy to stand up and fight for the Constitution.
Interesting. I always get overwhelmed and sad, as you know, when I talk to you, and you have to kind of bring me back periodically. Well, yeah, I know that's what you say. That's why how you bring me back. So you've made the case for a utopian divorce, right?
No, not at all. Why was it? Why would any divorce be
No.
utopian?
Well, a one that is a better situation than we're in now, perhaps.
Wait, okay. To go from better to utopia, it's like,
Well, the reason I say utopian,
it'd be better for us to go to one restaurant than another. Oh, you utopian.
Yeah. The reason I say that is because divorces are never good. They're always bad in my thinking. And so I mean,
They're always
maybe the
costly.
process of divorce.
Yeah.
Maybe the process is what's bad. I don't know, but I can't think of anybody. People have felt it's the right thing to do, and that they're glad they've done it, but they did not like they would rather almost have not done it, even though it might have been the right thing to do for them.
Well, I'll quote Thomas Sowell, who said there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So I don't dispute what you're saying in the slightest, that any divorce, whether personal or national, is going to be difficult and tricky. But the question is, as compared to what? As compared to the status quo. And I think for myself and increasing numbers of Americans, the status quo is intolerable.
What about a loose federalism? What about something which is really what the original idea of a more perfect union was, I think.
It's easier to abolish a government than to significantly shrink its power. There's no mechanism and there's no incentive in Washington to, including among conservative Republicans, to in any effective way shrink the size of DC. We saw this when you have a Democratic president, Democratic Congress, Republican president, Republican Congress, Democratic president, Republican Congress, and Republican Congress and Republican president, Democratic Congress. In no combination of those was there even a suggestion or attempt to shrink the size of the federal budget by $1.
You were in your case for American secession. Well, I want to start with the principle of secession, first of all. According to Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, you can't have secession. It's not a logic inherent in the contract of the Federalist Union unless both sides agree or all parties agree, right?
No. George Washington was a secessionist, and I respect him a lot more than Jackson or Lincoln, who both killed many numbers of their own countrymen.
And what was Washington's logic? I'm not aware of it.
We were part of the British Empire. He said, I want to secede from Great Britain. A lot of people said, you're crazy. You can't beat the most powerful army in the world. All you have behind you is a bunch of white trash. You don't even have shoes. He constantly had to retreat. And lo and behold, at a certain point, what had been impossible became perceived as inevitable.
But where is the logic of secession from the United States?
It's the same principle. We seceded from Great Britain, and now a portion of the United States, we're just going to carry it forward. We've already had internal secessions before. Maine used to be part of Massachusetts until 1820. People don't even realize that. And of course, West Virginia and Virginia are another obvious example.
It's interesting that you're using the word secession for the American Revolution. And it's interesting to me that if you were talking to King George, he would, I think, call it an insurrection, right? The colonies were in revolt, not that they were trying to secede. And that was Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson's logic too, which is that's why Lincoln called the South, the Confederates so-called, because he did not believe there was any legal framework for secession other than insurrection that needed to be brought back in proper alignment. And you reject all that logic.
I am not interested in how kings perceive my rights, my country, or my freedom, number one. And as I think everyone realizes, what is legal is what the people in power decide is legal. If the South had been allowed to secede, they would have retroactively said, oh, they had the right all along. And in fact, before the Civil War, there was a huge movement in New England to secede because the argument was no union with slaveholders. So the right for a country to divide itself, it's just kind of crazy to me that America has to be perpetual when no country on earth has ever had that kind of need and demand that it's going to live forever.
Is the wording in our Constitution about perpetuity? I think it is, right?
There's wording in the Constitution about the Second Amendment. There's wording about free speech. The First Amendment guaranteed the right of people to peaceably assemble. No one even bothered to invoke that during the lockdowns during COVID. So it is very much a dead letter.
Tell me more about that. How did you feel about the excesses that we got into during COVID?
I think what the COVID situation caused was given some by design or otherwise, gave some very nefarious people some very useful information about the limits of American and international compliance to edicts.
Isn't it weird the whole world complied? Except Africa. They didn't need to. They didn't bother. And they did fine.
I don't think it's weird at all. I think human beings are naturally compliant with those who are in authority. And we've had decades of a media operation and an educational system, especially in the West, designed to train people to be subservient and to bend the knee.
My wife is reacting to everything you're saying. She's out here saying preach, I think. Yes. Truth. She said, true, speak.
Said true.
And so if we have some sort of disunion, well, let me ask something else. You brought up in the case for the secession in the article, you talked about the South being the whipping boy because of their history with slavery. I noticed I'm very focused on Reconstruction in that I really believe strongly that much of the trauma that is being sort of, in the echoes of trauma. I mean, obviously slavery was, traumatic and horrible, but the Reconstruction was perhaps, I don't want to say worse, but another layer of violence that people seem to have forgotten about. At least the general American mind seems unaware that this was a time of roving warlords just indiscriminately killing black people. It was terrible. And so
I,
there's a period there. Go ahead.
I thought you were also something else where effectively the South, the former Confederacy, became Afghanistan. They were under occupied by what they regard as foreign territory. And then they, what they had to put up with, they took it out on those who are weaker than them, which is human nature, which is, as you said, the black people. So no one in the North gave a crap about these former slaves.
It's a little more complicated as I understand it, which is that, of course, when the circumstance you're talking about is exactly what happened. But there was planned to be a much heavier hand of occupation and supervision. And what ended up happening under Johnson, the federal government just backed off, and the Democratic Congress just gave those sort of I don't want to say rights and privileges, but set up circumstances much like you're describing, where that's exactly what happened. These frustrated people acted out on those who they felt as responsible for the circumstance.
Wait, I don't know what you're referring to, because wasn't the Congress exclusively or overwhelmingly held by radical Republicans for many years after the Civil War? What Democratic Congress are you referring to?
And my understanding was there was Grant couldn't get anything done because of the Congress, and there was complete. My understanding, and as a reading of this, is they completely, I don't know if they had a majority or not, but they completely cowed to the Democratic influence, and the Democratic administrations in the various states set up. And you can blame it on Andrew Johnson or whatever else was going on in the mix. But it was a set of policies that allowed all that to happen. It didn't have to happen like that. I mean, Abraham Lincoln sort of had a plan. I mean, he wanted people to go back to their homes, but he wanted to, get things back in alignment. And his plan was to have a lot of African Americans in positions of authority and
his
elected
plan
office.
was to deport former slaves. He said
that was before that was not later. Really, Frederick Douglass.
What's it called? The Corwin Amendment. The Corwin Amendment. Let me look this up right now.
He talked about that maybe as long as midway through the war, and he's always said I would prefer reestablish the Union than save the slaves, but his ideas were considerably changed across the war, and Frederick Douglass was,
yes,
in my opinion, a big reason for those changes. I mean, he convinced him of any, as Frederick Douglass pointed out, he remained a white supremacist. He remained, Eurocentric, white, in his thinking for sure. But he really saw it's his job to bring Black Americans into citizenship, into the process. Now you can argue about how he got there and was it, militarily expedient and all that kind of stuff. But I do believe strongly that although he was can be seen as a white, again, this term white supremacy, everyone bristles when they hear it. They think of some sort of skinhead. No, I mean, he was Eurocentric, white in his thinking. He felt there was a natural tendency for white ascension. He for sure was in that camp, for sure. But he had also felt he was a big believer in the Declaration of Independence and the opening ideas in that as all men created equal, and wanted to get that right.
But he wasn't a big fan of the idea of independence, as you just said. And to your point, even after the Civil War and despite Reconstruction, I think it's almost impossible for anyone to say with a straight face that the South and the North, or what had formerly been the Confederacy and the Northeast states, have the same culture or are, in any effective way, the same country, other than on its face, and decreasingly so in recent years.
Where do you live now? You live in
Austin, the Republic
Austin.
of Texas.
So you're in the South. And Texas is yet another thing, right? Texas is different again, right? Texas has its own history of autonomy and craziness. There's lots of craziness in Texas history. And you can feel the difference.
And I want to point, and in the Texas Republican Party platform in the last year, a referendum to demand that Texas declare its independence is now part of the official Republican Party platform in Texas. So I agree with you that there's a lot of craziness here, and I revel in it, because what is crazy to one person just means to the other we're not going to have an argument. There's no point in having discussion any further. And that's exactly what I want.
Let's say, let's say that Texas decides to secede, okay? And let's say they, start that process of whatever that might look like. Do you think there's a world where the American military steps in and prevents that?
Yes, of course. Or attempts to.
So, okay. So how would this work? How would the divorce actually operationally, how would it work?
Well, you just gave one example. One way it would work is Texas says, all right, we're a republic again. And then they're like, okay, done. So that's one easy way. Another way would be if certain other states decided to join with Texas, or America could be split into four. If we're talking about what it would look like, I'm delighted. Because if you and I if I'm trying to sell you a car and you're arguing about what features the car should have, I've kind of done my job.
I'm just exploring.
Am I wrong?
Michael? No, I like the idea. I mean, you certainly have what you call foot in the door, right? Foot in the door.
Right. And I'll say one more thing to everybody else listening. If it was 2015, 14, which is very recent, and I asked everyone listening to this, which of the following things is more likely to you? That Texas is going to declare that it's its own country again, or that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee and the president? 99% of people would say Texas.
Yes, you're right. You're right. So did Trump do something to hasten this process, do you think? And if so,
yes,
what?
I think he's done an enormous job, thankfully, in further dividing America. I think he's done a great job in having people recognize that political discourse is often not only pointless, but counterproductive. And I think he's created these silos, which so many people in corporate media bemoan, but which I delight in, where people are more ideologically self-segregating and choosing to live alongside people who think and act like them.
I don't think I told you this last time we talked, but I remember that I was reading something about Osama bin Laden's philosophy and plan. One of his major objectives was to try to turn us into 50 independent countries, independent republics or countries or something. Are we merely on the road that he established, and are we falling victim to something that some outside force put in place?
Well, let's follow this logic. If Osama bin Laden wanted New York City to be destroyed, does that mean it shouldn't be destroyed? Of course it should be destroyed. So just because Osama bin Laden says something doesn't mean that it's, yeah, you heard me, doesn't mean that it's wrong. We can't keep making our decisions just doing the opposite of what bad people say. That is a complete logical fallacy. And I'm not saying that it should be 50 countries at all. I'm just worried about Texas, and everyone else can, blank off.
And then as far as your opening comment about, the evil intent and evil empire, we have a leader in China that people are very concerned about. Aren't you concerned that this dissociation would put us at the whim of these folks?
I, to be honest, I don't understand this argument. Let's talk it through, because I do respect your opinion. Okay. Let's suppose America splits into two countries. One's 175 million, one's 175. Canada has like 35 million. South Korea has like 70. Japan has 100 million. I don't understand how we become the next target. And if Texas secedes, for example, China is just going to go for Texas. This argument makes no sense to me. Now, I agree with you that we should be extremely concerned about Chinese influence, that the Chinese government is, other than perhaps North Korea, one of the most malevolent governments on earth. That said, it is much easier, in my opinion, for America that has separated to be free of Chinese influence than have us be united under media centers in New York and Washington who are under the thumb of Chinese influence.
Do you think that when you say under the thumb of Chinese influence, were they a major player in some of the lockdown decisions that were made and some of the stupid decisions that were made during COVID? And what's the evidence for that? As you said, the media is under the influence of China. What do we know?
Well, I just mean how the media reports on certain things. When you have movies that are exported to China, they're kind of edited so as not to offend Chinese sensibilities. I think websites, like search engines, they are very much bend the knee, as opposed to Google's old slogan of first do no evil, right? Now they're just going to kowtow and accommodate Chinese influence. So I'm not referring to things like elections or that. I'm not, COVID. I'm not informed about what China did at all in that regard vis-a-vis lockdowns, but the fact that universally the behaviors were the same, I would describe that much more to a lemming effect than rather than every country on earth is under Chinese control.
It was the evidence suggests that what happened was our so-called public health leaders sent people to talk to their counterparts in China and were hoodwinked by them, frankly,
Oh, wow.
into
Okay. I
adopting,
believe it.
into adopting what was a political maneuver, and were sort of convinced that it was a medical intervention that had absolute efficacy. I mean, it's just insane that we adopted these policies that the CCP put in place so as not to save face were there a leak from the Wuhan lab. And we adopted them whole hog, and advised Italy to do the same. And then when we did so, the whole world followed us, which again, maybe the best thing about some sort of American dissociation would be stopping the rest of the world from continually following us in when we get into fallacies and problematic behaviors and culture.
Well, do you think that if the Republic of Texas reasserts itself, it would have been that amenable to Chinese influence and suggestion? I certainly don't.
No, 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 no. It would have been the People's Republic of California would have been right there with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see my wife getting very interested in what you're saying. Do you have any comments you want to make? You're sort of agitated by this.
No, you're doing a great job.
Well, I want to hear your thoughts. Are you, and so because I know you're very concerned about China.
I mean, I can see why we should think about splitting everything up. It does isolate the well, it sort of
Pathogen.
yeah, I mean, it moves things around, but I don't want to get stuck with Oregon.
That's the reason she doesn't want to do it, because she might get stuck with Oregon. You're stuck with
Not on the table.
California. Well, I mean,
We're already in California.
you're already stuck with California. You don't want we don't want the People's Republic of Oregon, Washington, California. Too much. We'll just call that North Korea.
West Korea.
Oh my gosh. That is so funny. Complete sidebar. I heard your buddy Lex Friedman talking to a psychiatrist in one of his recent podcasts. Did you hear that one? That psychiatrist was
Hey, a robot or a psychiatrist walking into a bar.
That's why I brought it up to you. One of the reasons I brought it up to you is that his robotness came through loud and clear. Your theory, I think, is absolutely correct. I think if you listen to that, it sort of proves your point. Not proves your point, establishes the fact that he's a robot. The psychiatrist who was, mental health professionals
Can I
have a
say
lot
something? Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, doctor,
Yeah.
I have a problem sleeping at night. Sometimes I think I'm a 1, but what if I'm a 0?
That's him. But he and by the way, I am a acolyte. I love his podcast. It's how I got exposed to you. I'm a big fan of his. But it was really interesting to me as somebody who's deep in this material. And again, mental health professionals can agree and disagree on a lot of stuff. But this guy that was talking to him, I thought was absolutely spot on, not only in what he was saying, but the way he was able to describe it. And he was talking about some of the fundamental principles of how human psychological landscapes and personalities are constructed. Lex could not get it. It was like talking to a robot. He could not understand it. And I was just dying when I was listening to it. I thought, and I thought, and I have to go on his show, Mike. You're going to have to help, Michael. You have to help me with that. Maybe I'll go on with you. But
Wait, why don't you put us both on the couch? Because we both have the same background. That would be such a fun episode.
If we could do something like that. You both are extremely different. Trust me, you're very, very different people. But he, it was really, and I thought to myself, but here's my thought. Even let's say he's not a robot, just for the sake of argument. I thought to myself, man, we have to really help people understand how humans work. People don't even somebody as brilliant as Lex doesn't get how humans really work. And I thought, wow, we have a job to do here. Go ahead.
I disagree in this regard. One of the reasons I wrote the North Korea book is because there was this idea in the popular consciousness that they're crazy. And I'm like, these people follow a internal logic. It has worked very well for them. They've sustained their country far longer than the Soviet Union and other empires. So calling them crazy is just a confession that you don't understand how they work or think. And I think there is a strong aversion in popular thinking and behavior to try to see things from other points of view. Like if I sat somebody down and be like, we need to look at things from Bin
Agreed.
Laden's point of view, you sound like you're a Bin
Yeah.
Laden sympathizer, where it's supposed to, it's like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, don't you want to know what Al Qaeda is going to do next? That's extremely crucial for
Yeah.
anyone who's under attack,
Yes.
but they don't think like that.
I think what I call listening to, trying to understand what's across the table from you. Whenever you're in any kind of dialogue over anything with other humans, you got to put your head in theirs and try to understand their point of view. It's not as easy to do. And so I've been doing that the whole pandemic, trying to understand, like, for instance, just a simple sort of version of that is the excessive push to vaccinate children. I'm like, what are they thinking? What is in their head
Yeah.
that they think this is the right thing to do? And I can't get it yet. Typically you can kind of understand what's going on. We'll see if they can give me that information at some point. But that'd be a lot of fun.
Something else you've had to deal with in your practice is that people are often very inarticulate, even about their own thoughts and emotions. So rather than reacting to someone saying at face value, take a second and try to read between the lines, because a lot of times they're very bad at expressing. And if you focus on what they're saying instead of what they're trying to express, you're going to completely miss it.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And you can, and it's okay to ask, explain, understand, trying to get my head around it, help me understand it. But you got to understand other people's experiences. It is vitally important, even if it's a robot. So
1111.
Yeah. I was going to say, you mentioned, you just sort of tilted at the fact that I've had some similar experience to yourself and Lex's, which is that my grandfather was Ukrainian. My grandmother was Belarusian, but they lived in Ukraine. And my grandmother used to describe, so there was a giant diaspora from Ukraine at the beginning of the 20th century in Belarus, giant. And people aren't aware that this was the case. Mostly Jews, because they were the targets. This was leading up to the Holodomor, which was the famine that what do they call it when they move everybody around? The
Gulags.
The gulags were set up, and the famine occurred. Kulaks, yeah. My family ran away, was part of the diaspora in response to what was happening in the lead up to that. And I think I explained this to you, and I'll do it again. My grandmother used to call it the bandits, that bandits would come through their town and destroy everything. And again, the Jews were the targets. And the suggestion is, in retrospect, that was either the Tsarists, the Bolsheviks, the Mensheviks, or just plain old criminals running around like little warlords, just destroying stuff for their own advantage. Is that probably what was going on at that time?
Well, yeah, I mean, the level of anti-Semitism in what became the Soviet Union was just astronomical, and it was very much part of the government. So when the government, which had a lot of Jews in the government, did something bad, it was the fault of the Jews. And when the government wasn't working, it was the fault of the Jews who were undermining it. So that tradition goes back for centuries in what became the Soviet Union. And the thing that was kind of interesting, you brought up Lex. When I was on his show a couple episodes ago, I was talking about what my family went through, and my grandmother was trying to flee the Nazis and survive the Holocaust. And I was brought me teary-eyed, because you try to imagine someone who's in your own family where your choices are either being murdered by the Nazis or living in a state of constant hunger, where all you could think about every day is bread, bread, bread. And of course, some of the Nazi commentators are like, oh, you talk about the Holocaust some more. Why don't you talk about the Holodomor more? And I'm like, well, I am. Let me get this book out the door. So yeah, hope the Nazis are happy now. I doubt that they will be.
Oh my God. It's so weird and what scares me almost more than anything else is that people in this country are not just unaware of the founding principles of what set this up, and how we got to where we are, and what the shared traumas were, and the shared ideas, and the ideas upon which this was all founded. There seems to be very little awareness of history at all. And so the things you're talking about are completely missed for sure.
Well, that's by design. I think the media tries to keep people in a state of perpetual present. where if there's something contradictory from 2 years ago, if they don't talk about it, it doesn't occur in popular consciousness. The greatest analogy to this is if you have some kind of soap opera, right? And Dynasty from the 80s. I'm going to show my age. There was one season where I think his character's named Adam. He rapes this girl named Kirby. And 2 seasons later, he's marrying her and no one just talks about it, right? So it's kind of like, well, in the context of that show, if they don't talk about it, it didn't really happen or it's not relevant. And it's the same thing. Like if there's something that happened 4 years ago, I remember, here's one easy example. Greece was going to default on their debt with the EU, and they were on the verge of voting in a radical leftist government, and they did, and they never brought it up again. If we didn't send ground troops into Syria, there was going to be a genocide of the Kurds. This is another Holocaust. We were talking about this every month, every day on TV. We have to do this, we have to do this. We didn't try to send in the troops to Syria. They just stopped talking about it. So there is very much this perpetual present that's by design in corporate media.
And who's the orchestrator? Why is that being designed in that way? Who is there? Because I was in corporate media for a long time, and at the time there was never anybody questioning anything I said until I said something they got mad about. But there was no day in day out kind of orchestration that I was aware of.
You don't need an orchestration. If I'm writing a soap opera, right, I'm not thinking, well, 5 seasons ago, otherwise, unless I want to introduce a new storyline. It's very much what's happening today, what's happening this week. And if you're going to provide context that makes things complicated for people and it makes the conversation less nuanced, then that's exactly what they're fighting against. And it's also harder to kind of guide the populace in the direction that you would like.
But you're saying then guide we were just trying to get ratings. That was always the mandate from above. Get eyes. And you're right. You couldn't do anything complicated. You have to just do things. You have to sort of what one of my producers used to call make something happen. There had to be some conflict on TV, and that was it. And that was it. That's all you worried about at the time. And I worried about trying to get good information out, but there was the corporate part of it was, and I tell this story. I remember seeing a 60 Minutes style interview when I was a kid, and this thing stayed with me vividly. I think I brought this up for you before. We'll bring it up for this audience. Was this 60 Minutes style interview was hammering on a Soviet journalist. How can you do this? How can you distort what you say on behalf of the government? How can you push out propaganda? And finally, the guy got frustrated. He looked up at the American reporter and went, "Hey, in our country, the news media, journalism is a political enterprise. In yours, it's a commercial enterprise. You will have and do have distortions because of that." And that stayed with me till this moment. And I think that's what we're seeing the playing out of as we had the 24-hour news cycle, multiple cable channels, everything's on YouTube and social media. They're competing for eyes, and they're going to places that are not good and not good for the populace.
I wish it were simple as that, because if that were the case, they'd be more interested in trying to change their strategy when they're losing their eyeballs. From my perspective, oftentimes when they're going in a political direction, they're losing eyeballs. They will blame the eyeballs. It's the fault of the audience for being too X, Y, or Z. And they will continue to double down on their politics. In fact, I remember very vividly after 2016, Dean Banquet, I think is his name, who's the head of the New York Times, said, "All right, we blundered. We missed this by a long shot. We're going to be more amenable to what the Trump voters are saying," and that went out the window in 2 days. Now, to play devil's advocate, going against Trump constantly did great numbers for their sales, but one of the things I uncovered in the White Pill was to what extent it wasn't just what was happening in the Soviet Union. It was to what extent Western apologists were making excuses for things like show trials, where people were confessing to things that were literally impossible, to concentration camps, to starving millions of people by design. And this wasn't done simply for ratings. This was done for ideological reasons.
Okay, I'm going to take a little break, and I want to pick back up with that. The Western apologists were really egregious in the first half of the 20th century and in response to what was going on in Russia. So, Michael Malice, everybody, besides buying the White Pill, do you want to send anybody a particular website?
I apologize in advance for my Twitter, which is twitter.com/Michael Malice, and my YouTube's Michael Malice Official.
Fair enough. He's apologizing ahead of time, so I suggest you check it out. We'll be right back. Not sure how to say I love you this Valentine's Day? Well, nothing says I love you more than a few minutes of relaxation, and Genucel Skincare does just that. Gives you the luxury gift of feeling like you spent the entire day in the spa, all while, in fact, in the comfort of your own home. Susan loves to feel pampered and special, especially on Valentine's Day, so why not relax with a detoxifying mask and feel amazing after only one use?
I know I'm a snob about the products I use on my face. Everybody knows it. Every time I go to the dermatologist's office, they're just rows and rows of different creams. Retinols, vitamin C cream, under eye cream, night creams.
Scrubs.
And then when I get to the counter, they're overpriced. All kinds of products that you can all find at Genucel.com. I've fallen in love with this product at a fraction of the price. I've been using Genucel for 6 months now, and I'm very impressed.
Genucel's mask works wonders by pulling out all of your imperfections to make you feel refreshed and looking like you just stepped out of a facial appointment. Order the Dr. Drew package today and try this amazing mask for free. That's right, every single Dr. Drew and Susan package includes a free mask to celebrate you and your loved one on this Valentine's Day. Go to Genucel.com/Drew and enter code Drew for an extra 10% off your entire purchase. Plus, all orders are upgraded to priority shipping for free. That's Genucel.com/Drew, GENUCEL.com/DREW. Despite the U.S. blowing through the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling this January, the White House and the government still refuses to reduce spending. When it comes to fiscal responsibility, you can't afford to bury your head in the sand. Now would be a great time to consider gold with Birch Gold. In times of high uncertainty and instability, gold is king. Birch Gold makes it easy to convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in precious metals. Here's what you need to do. Visit birchgold.com/Drew to claim your free information kit, the info kit on gold, and then talk to one of their precious metals specialists. Think about this. To dig our country out of this mountain of debt, every single taxpayer in the country would have to write a check for $247,000, and of course, they're not, so it's only getting worse. Protect yourself with gold today by visiting birchgold.com/Drew. That is BIRCH gold.com/Drew. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, and countless 5-star reviews, you can trust Birch Gold to protect your future. Here's what I want you to do. Visit birchgold.com/Drew today. And we are back with the one and only Michael Malice. Michael Malice at Twitter and I believe Instagram as well. The book is called The White Pill. And before the break, we were talking about how there were really, if I remember right, Michael, there was one journalist in particular that went over to Russia and actually won a Pulitzer Prize or something, if I remember. Is that right?
Wait,
Am I
the good guy or the
remembering
bad
this history
guy?
properly? The bad guy that went over
bad
there
guy, yeah.
and
Walter Duranty.
bought everything they were feeding him and knew he was being censored and still went and presented this excessive glowing report. Talk to me about that guy. I forget his name.
Walter Duranty. He actually, one of his claims to fame is that he was friends with Aleister Crowley and stole his girlfriend and later married her. He was one of the most evil human beings who ever lived. He got an interview. I detail him at length here in The White Pill. He was the New York Times man in Washington, in Moscow. Mm-hmm. And when Gareth Jones, who was an independent, very young reporter, decided to, my alarm's going off to remind me to do Dr. Drew. 1 second. Hold on a second. I'm so sorry.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, good. You wouldn't have forgotten us. Yeah, this is a hair-raising story when you hear what this guy did. It's awful.
So Gareth Jones, the Soviets were very big on controlling the information that left the Soviet Union. And if you're a reporter in the Soviet Union from the West, you had to get everything filed through a censor. So that heavily encouraged you to self-censor, because if I want to file a story and I know, Drew's going to look over it, well, Drew could also say, let me talk to my supervisor. I don't know who your supervisor is. I can never get a hold of him. So it's very hard for me to get information out. So that was one mechanism they used. But there was someone named Gareth Jones, young reporter. They were not allowing anyone to go to Ukraine. He took a train to Ukraine and got off a stop early. And then he started wandering the countryside and he saw what was being done to these people in these villages. And here's the thing, your own body would betray you. So the activists from the government would come, get any grain you had, any food you had. Then they'd come back at night to search your house. If they found anything, they'd wreck the house and put you out in the street naked. You can't go to another town. You have no money, and you were forced to starve. And if they saw you were not leaning out in your face, they knew you were a hoarder, and that food is government property. So he went from village to village, and they told him, we have no hope. We're doomed. He reported this to the West, and Walter Duranty, the guy from the New York Times, led a cavalcade of Western journalists to say that this is all lies. This is anti-Soviet propaganda. You guys don't get it. 16-page article, I believe, in the New York Times, front headline, there is no starvation. Russians are merely tightening their belts. There's no famine, nor is there likely to be. Years later, Walter Duranty admitted, oops, I guess I got it wrong. But for me, when you're saying, oops, guess I got it wrong, when you're talking about starving millions of people and denouncing the reporters who did their footwork and saying reporters shouldn't go into these towns, there's nothing to see here, the only people complaining are loudmouths, everyone else is busy farming, that just speaks to how, what drives me crazy when these like boomer conservatives are like, the press was honest when I was a kid. It was always some of the worst people imaginable.
We went through a period where it was better, and we'd forgotten what could have happened and what did happen. And let's be fair, doesn't that playbook sound very familiar to what we've all just been through recently with disinformation and misinformation and misinformation czars? We're going to keep the ministry of truth in line. This is all too familiar to the present moment, when people who try to say something real about what's going on are being crushed.
I was just on Jimmy Dore's show, comedian and podcaster, and he had this amazing bit. I was peeing my pants as a result of it. There you go. Thank you. There's the headline. And Jimmy Dore said, they try to make it out. Don't do your own research, right? You're not a doctor. You're not an expert. And Jimmy Dore's like, that's called reading. He goes, they're trying to make it that reading is what stupid people do. Oh, you're looking things up, reading your own art. You're doing some reading over there? What are you, some kind of idiot? It's just, when you think about it, it's just really kind of deranged, but yet effective.
I do think it's all the sort of vacuum left behind by the distrust that's been fomented, and the people do have to go have sources they can rely on. Like I'm a good reader of medical literature. I'm not as good as Vinay Prasad. I go to him. I watch what he reads. I listen to what he says. I go back to literature and found him to be just. Some people can just penetrate the literature, and you got to have those people around to help you. They're like consultants. They can really help you get things. When you're relying solely on yourself, I kind of understand that that's a risky proposition, but I do recommend that people read and educate themselves and do the best they can, nevertheless.
But you also say where you drew your opinions from, where people can go, I'm saying this based on this article or this person. No, you're not saying, hey, trust me, I'm Dr. Drew. You're saying, this is how I came to this conclusion. And now they're in a position to be like, okay, I don't trust this Dr. Drew guy. Let me look where he's talking about and let me look at other sources. That is very different from trust the science. Who do you think you are? And the fact that people who have never stepped foot in a medical school will tell you, who is a real doctor, not a Dr. Jill doctor, that you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to medicine. But that just speaks to the arrogance that is put forward by corporate media to its adherents.
I completely agree. I've always said, journalists aren't expert in anything. They're always looking for a story. And in biology, the story is no story. There's no story. If you have a narrative in biology, you're taking it down to a kindergarten level to help somebody understand it, not because there's a story there, because the reality is much more complicated. Back to listen to the science, I thought of something that day I thought you would like. Prior to the 20th century government excesses, we had divine rights of kings, and we had monarchies that were extremely, potentially dictatorial. And I would argue that Louis XIV was probably the prime example of that. Would you agree that he was the sort of one of the shining example of centralized dictatorial authority?
No, I think there's a lot of kings who are much more malevolent than him.
I didn't say I agree more malevolent. Well, let me we'll tell you why I'm framing it that way. He is famous for having said this, I am the state, right? L'état c'est moi, right? Well, okay. L'état c'est moi. Everyone I knew until this year, maybe, or last year, would looked at him with tremendous disdain for having that kind of centralized dictatorial attitude about himself, that everything is about him, the state. Be careful, everybody. We just had a guy stand up and say, I'm the science. I'm the science. That is not far off from l'état c'est moi. It really isn't. And that kind of thing should make us shudder when bureaucrats tell you that they are fill in the blank authority.
Well, as an anarchist, I agree with your second point, but he was right. He was the state. He's the king. In a monarchy, the king is the state. So it might sound kind of shocking to contemporary ears, but I don't think he was saying anything that's particularly controversial in his time.
No. I agree. What I'm saying is we had citizens of this country looked at that kind of monarchical authority with great disdain and like thank goodness that's passed. And yet here we have leaders and bureaucrats in our current government saying things that sound like echoes of that past.
But I think I'm just going to quote H.L. Mencken, the great kind of curmudgeon of the early 20th century, when he said, the average man does not want to be free, he merely wants to be safe. And I think if anyone thinks that the way to freedom is to persuade a majority of your fellows that liberty should be their highest value, you are playing a fool's errand.
Well, safe, of course, I think that, and survival, when you really get down to it. But if you have those things in place, I would argue that freedom becomes a very quickly an important priority, no?
For most people, no. Most people are very happy to have large sections of their decision making outsourced to others. And as long as they have a TV set and some kind of there's a reason why Brave New World resonates so effectively even today, how many decades after it's been written. It's much easier to manage a population through bread and circuses than it is through fear.
I want to go back to what Garrett saw in the Ukraine. If I remember right, not only did the government come after you if you had any food or looked like you had food, didn't the Ukrainians start to turn on each other? If anybody looked healthy or fed, that they would be not just ostracized, but there could be violence against them, right?
Right. So the media did an effective job in the Soviet Union of blaming the kulaks, which is these rich landowners, which effectively basically meant anyone they didn't like. You're starving because in Ukraine, they're hoarding their food. Now, I have no idea what's going on in Ukraine because my media is not reporting that to me. So any of these Ukrainians who fled Ukraine and tried to get their own food on the other part of Russia, they were blamed for that which they were fleeing and was imposed on them. And there's a scene in the book, which was very disturbing for me to research and write about, where there was this young girl just begging with a crumb of bread in her hand on a line outside a a store, and the shopkeep looking at the people waiting online, daring them to help her because like, you're going to help an enemy of the people. And she died on the spot. And basically the idea is like, good, you deserved it. We're hungry because of you and people like you. So these totalitarian governments are very effective at scapegoating. Emmanuel Goldstein in 1984, you find a section of the populace and you're miserable because they're undermining this great plan that the rest of us have.
Why did the Jews so often through history become the object of that? And by the way, I find it especially odd, given that Belarus for hundreds of years encouraged Jews to come and be professionals and develop their society. The Duke of Belarus organized things around them. Why always the scapegoating, do you think?
First of all, tradition, it's easy, right? So if there's something in the ether that, if you learned 50 years ago that it was the Jews' fault that they got kicked out of some country, if something goes wrong nowadays, I could just point to that and they'd be like, oh yeah, I heard about this from my grandma. She was right. I was duped. That's one. The other reason is Jews were both isolated and self-isolating. And then when you have an outsider group who's alien to the broader culture, it's very easy to cause them to really be the outsider group and to pin a lot of things on them. And also Jewish success compared to non-Jewish success in many of these countries was a source of great tension as well. And if you're going to be the money lenders, as many Jews were driven to, it's very easy to have a way of debt relief. It's like, all right, you don't have to pay them off their debts. You get to be the good guys, the politician, and they get to be the villains.
How about the role of envy and narcissism and all this? It's certainly playing a big function now. Do you think through history that's been a big deal?
I'm not a historian or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I think envy, I don't know if that's per se what I would put it at the foot of, But I think when you have this kind of the diaspora, and this, you have it even today in certain circles, like people regard Black Americans as a historical accident, and they'll also say, get over slavery. Well, which is it? If you're getting over slavery, you're not going to look at them as a historical accident. And if you're looking at them like they're only here because of slavery, well, then that's over and you have to accept them. So it's very easy to find, and every country, Britain, it's the Irish, I'm sure there's someone in Canada, every country has a population and they're kind of have their own weird thing. And when things get tough, it's easy to say, think we're suffering because of those weirdos over there.
What do we do today with the media? We've brought it forward from where the media was duplicitous in the Soviet Union that resulted in untoward violence and death, where you've sort of pointed out that there are echoes of all of that here today and how media operates. What do we do with that?
Always remind corporate journalists on social media that you have no understanding of how much hatred and contempt the average person has toward you. Remind them that the battle is won when the average American regards a corporate journalist exactly as they regard a tobacco executive. And keep in mind that these people do not merely have a bias, which we all do. We all have a perspective that we add to how we sift information, but an agenda, that they are starting with the story and then find evidence to reach the conclusion which they have preconceived. So when you make, this is one of the greatest things about Elon Musk taking over Twitter. Now the journalists are no longer a protected class, and they're taking L after L after L on social media, and they're crying about it. And it's just glorious to see for once in American history.
Why isn't the Twitter file thing? I guess it's because corporate media can't admit their role in all this, but you would still think that somebody, just the fact, look, just yesterday, the day before yesterday, New York Times published an opinion piece about the masks not working. I couldn't believe it. I thought, just New York Times, everybody, opinion piece showing them that it's done, the mask did not work, and we have learned nothing. That seemed like a great leap forward for me. Why can't we have somebody write a little something about maybe these Twitter files do tell us something?
But Dr., they wrote that because it's that perpetual present. They will never force their readers to be like, masks don't work, we were wrong. They will put the information once it no longer matters. And another big example is we don't know who went to Epstein Island, or there were John Dingell, who was a congressman. There were all these sealed cases where various members of Congress settled in terms of depositions for sexual harassment. Those cases have been sealed for a long time. There's no hunger in the media, either on the right or the left, to get those cases unsealed and get those names. I think it's very, very curious.
It is very curious. It's curious to me that we don't know why Damar Hamlin fell dead in the field. It just seems like the most obvious thing in terms of going after a story. That seems like the most obvious thing in the world to understand why that's being hidden, what happened there, what needs to be learned from it, why it was obfuscated. It just seems like such a natural for what I thought journalists did, but I guess not, huh?
This is another reason why I'm so hopeful for the future of this country. These people are often very lazy. So people who are black-pilled, meaning rap, we can't win, the West is lost, America is lost. When you look at, let's suppose, John Fetterman, are you really going to say this is an unstoppable foe? I can't stand up against him. And there's plenty of Republicans as well who fit that mold. When you look at them, you're like, really? This person's going to be the thing that I can't stand up against? So that, I think, is an important Don Lemon. You can't look at Don Lemon and be like, all right, like there's no way I can stand up to this guy. And that's why I'm so hopeful for the future of this country once it's divided.
And then, of course, you have Margaret Taylor Greene towing your line.
Yeah.
You love her. Really?
I
no
love,
kidding.
I think it's very useful to have crazies in political discourse, because that forces a lot of people to go to their plan B, because plan A is to have discourse in perpetuity. And once you see, okay, there's no talking to this person, they're a loon, you have to retreat to a fallback position. And that is what I want to see more of.
Where do you want people to go in response to Marjorie?
Well, I just like that now, we spent a year where everyone, including you and myself, had to grapple with and I say this as an anarchist, had to grapple with the idea of defunding the police, that we're going to have these neighborhoods where there's less money spent on cops, more on community workers, and yet people can't arm themselves to protect their homes. And we all had to talk about this with a straight face. So I'm very gladdened that now people are going to take the idea of national divorce, which I was mocked at for quite a long time. It's never going to happen. It's impossible. This is just craziness on Twitter or on the fringes. Well, that's how ideas become mainstream. They start with someplace crazy and with crazy people. And then everyone's like, oh my God, can you believe what these crazy people say? And then some sociopath politician is like, you know what? There's a lot of these crazies. I'm going to push forth this idea and get further in power. And that's how I think this national divorce thing is going to go.
Explain to people your brand of anarchism.
I'm an anarchist without adjectives. The black flag comes in many colors, so I like them all.
But you are not you're not anti-police. You're not for dissolution of government.
I'm very anti-police. Every cop is a criminal from my perspective.
I've not heard you say this. Why is that? Because they have
Because
no authority to do what they do.
every police officer enforces unlawful laws on the citizenry that are perfectly innocent and completely in a violation of the Constitution and basic principles. And I'll give you a very obvious example. How much money would Gavin Newsom have to pay you to tell a little girl she has to shut down her lemonade stand? And what kind of person would do this?
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. Listen, that kind of stuff was going on all the time. People's livelihood, their family businesses were destroyed, and they weren't just asked to do it. They were, they put steel doors and soldered things shut if anybody tried to dared to. And it really wasn't the police. The police were apologetic, and much like the lifeguards that had to tell people to get off the beach. I mean, there were 22-year-old kids telling people to get off the beach, apologizing, but they were told they had to do it. It was, look, you wonder how police, well, this is a different conversation, but how the average person is persuaded to do things that are not good. We saw
There
a lot
is
of that
no law so obscene that the police would refuse to enforce it, up to and including the mass execution of innocent children. And this has been demonstrated in every country throughout history, time and time again. And every law that is passed by the governors that you hate and the presidents you hate would be letters to Santa without men and women in badges willing to impose them on the citizenry.
And so what would the solution be to criminal behavior?
There's no reason why security is a service different from any other. When you have a government monopoly on a product or service, right? When you have a government monopoly on any service, not only does it become scarce and unmanageable, it also becomes politicized. We don't talk about the Republican approach to dresses or the Democratic approach to pasta. Those things don't make sense because the government is not involved in the production in the sense that I mean of food or clothing. But because you have politics involved in security, all of a sudden it becomes a problem for literally everybody.
Wouldn't private for-profit police services necessarily discriminate against people who couldn't afford it?
No, because have you ever been to a hotel?
I've been to a hotel.
There's security there. You're not paying for the security. When you go to a bar, which is full of young men full of testosterone and alcohol, there's security there. It is only the places that are under government protection, meaning the subways, the streets, the parks, where crime is the biggest issue and nothing is being done, even libraries, nothing is being done about it. When areas are under private purview, your first approach, even a mall, is to make sure that that area is secure for anyone who's welcome to come in.
I worry about what they call the tragedy of the commons, something like that occurring from if you had a collective force like that. But has any society ever done that?
That's the status quo, is what you're talking about, tragedy of the commons. Police are a relatively historically recent phenomenon. We used to have private police services before, and then it became kind of these standardized gangs that work through the state. But again, I don't think that's a very good pro-anarchy argument, because that is not historically recent.
And you also have an interesting way of looking at taxes.
Well, I don't think they're that interesting. What do you mean? How is that interesting? Taxes are legitimate.
I think, and you call them robbery, essentially.
Well, don't you think that? I mean, what's the difference between the mafia and Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi? In the views of anarchists, they are literal gangsters. And people think of gangster, they think of whatever face tattoos, maybe holding the gun like this. No, it's men and women in suits, often with big rings, and you sit down and kiss the ring.
And then they steal your money.
Yeah. Well, no, no. They take their money before you even see it. There's withholding. They get it before you get
Right.
it. They make sure they get it
Right.
before you get it.
Right. But I think I'm trying to get you to say what I've heard you say before, which is that's essentially robbery. They rob you of their money.
Sure, I'll say that. Yes, they rob you of your money.
Yeah. I think that's what it was. Okay. Well, this is always interesting to walk down these paths with you, and yet you remain extremely positive and optimistic. What does it look like? What is our world? Can you predict 5 years down the road, or even 3 years down the road? Are you optimistic in the intermediate and near term, or is it only long term that you're optimistic?
I am very optimistic in the near term because I think there is an increasing normalization of the idea of uh, um, cold warfare between states and the federal government. There is an enormous incentive for President Biden to try to bring Governor Abbott of Texas and Governor DeSantis of Florida under his thumb from his tribe. Uh, Abbott, who I don't think is particularly principled at all, but sees a big incentive in playing to his base and standing up to Washington. DeSantis does that to a whole other level. So the more you have this pressure on this system, which I regard as outdated if it ever made sense to begin with, the healthier it's going to be for everyone else. Because when politicians work together, it's always to the detriment of the citizenry.
And again, so are you predicting something? Are you imagining or anticipating something in the next 3 to 5 years?
I'm imagining President Harris, and it will be absolutely hilarious to watch that cackling buffoon in front of the podium try to bring America together. It's going to be absolutely terrific. Absolutely terrific.
That makes you
I swear.
that makes you optimistic. I mean, I try to see the world through your eyes, as we were discussing earlier, and I don't see how that's optimistic. That's the hard part for me. That sounds
There's one easy way that's optimistic.
Scary.
When you have a president who is regarded with derision by the populace, as Trump was with large sections of the populace, it is almost impossible for such a person to bring us into an unnecessary war. Because if I'm sending my son or daughter overseas for war, it has to be someone who I respect and trust, like FDR, someone who's got gravitas. If you have her being like, we're sending troops to Ukraine, the number of Americans who will be like, over my dead body would be astronomical, and it would be dead on arrival.
And so you'd like to see us pull out of those sorts of operations?
I think the American empire is a very bad idea. And if you support the troops, a great way to do that is to get them out of harm's way.
I had dinner with Tulsi Gabbard a couple nights ago, and I don't want to speak for her, but she was lovely. I mean, she's as lovely as she seems in her public presentation. Yeah. And she has repeatedly expressed her concern about our sort of fantasy and myth about our military and violent conflict, that we still live in this sort of time. Words I used, I said, like, we imagine everything's Omaha Beach and we're going to win. And even that was much more horrible than we imagined it to have been. And I think we live in this weird fantasy.
As a traitor to America, even though she served in the military for many years, that you hate America, you're a dictator of politics. There's no shame in the war machine.
It's very weird, but here we are.
Can I say one more thing?
And so that
we killed several kids in Afghanistan, and no one even had to apologize for it, let alone get fired or go to jail. Like that, I think, speaks to the level of depravity of what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. That, to me, is completely unconscionable.
And so in 3 years, we have President Harris. How about 8 years? Then do we just have 8 years? The state leaderships? Yeah.
No, we're going to have the Republic of Texas. You're welcome to come visit from your, if they allow you to leave your home in California. Susan, you're welcome to come as well. I've got a nice guest room upstairs that I don't use. And I think the blue states are going to get much, much worse because the pressure is all on the accelerator. If I'm using that correctly, I don't know how to drive a car, and there's no mechanism to turn that boat around.
God, that is so true. Adam and I always talk about how they just keep rolling. They just keep going. It doesn't pull back. It doesn't decelerate. It just keeps going. Susan, you want to go to Austin, stay with Mike?
I make a mean goose, dumplings, and sauerkraut.
Sure.
All right. You're in. Liberty cabbage. Liberty cabbage. In Texas, we call it liberty cabbage.
We're in Austin all the time. We got to have dinner with you for sure. Okay.
Freedom fries.
Yeah.
Freedom fries, the freedom fries. All right, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a romp and a privilege to talk to you. And The White Pill is the book, the Anarchist Handbook, the what was the one on King Jong-il? I forget that name of that. Dear Reader. I mean, these are all worth your time, but the White Pill particularly, it's if you don't have familiarity with this history, you should. And this is a great way to gain some familiarity with it. Michael is very clear-headed. He comes from that part of the world. Yes, he has opinions, but he's just reporting what the facts of the matter really were. Susan, anything from your standpoint before we're wrapped up? Your mic's not on.
I was thinking about that. You guys were talking about why the Jews were not respected or whatever.
Targeted.
The one thing about nationalism and language is, the Jews always have their own language in wherever they go. So I think that was also an issue because it separates.
Well, they had a secret club, right? I always think that's a bad idea.
But they would speak in their own language, and they would.
You had special handshakes, special greetings, special language, special everything, and that the Armenians had that too, and they were the subject of a genocide.
Oh yeah.
Maybe for the same kind of, but the point you're making, Susan, maybe these cultural things that we aren't necessarily consciously aware of have great play in these sorts of extreme situations.
Because I always wondered too, why they were such an outcast.
All right.
But also, we have a benefit coming up on Saturday, and I just put the link to where you can bid on Dr. Drew. You get a meet and greet, virtual meet and greet. Get over there. We added 3 more meet and greets because we sold the first one out immediately, and we're raising money for foster kids in LA. And
it's a really good group.
The money goes to the right
Wonderful.
place. It really helps all the underprivileged. And
Yeah, I Michael, become more like Voltaire when I think about all these grand sweeps of history, these grand narratives. I just think the end of Candide. Il faut cultiver nos jardins. Just you must cultivate your own. You must cultivate your own gardens.
Yeah.
Just focus on your home, your family.
Albert Camus had the introductory quote to The White Pill, and he very much spoke about the need for every person to have their own conscience and do what they can to make the world a better place. And if you create, Rand had this quote as the man who fights for the future lives in it today. And I think and that's a very, very Jewish idea that if you save one life, you save the world. And it's incumbent upon all of us to leave the world a better place than we found it. And I could not agree more.
Are you an Ayn Rand fan too?
Oh, yeah. I own her copy of The Fountainhead.
Her copy?
Yeah, she's on the cover of the book.
That is crazy. All right. Well, that's why I'm coming to your house to visit that.
We're going to be in Austin in a month.
I would
visit
love
the
that.
scripture.
Text me.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much. And I will text you. We'll see you in a month or so. Michael Malice, everybody, get the White Pill. We have
Head on over to hillsides.org. There's a lot of other things on the auction block. You can, if you don't want to spend a lot of money and just contribute, they have a lot of cool stuff on there.
we have on Monday we have a congresswoman coming in here.
Yes, I do.
Lauren Brobert agreed to spend a little time with me. She's another really interesting voice in the Congress, and I don't know if I'm going to say this to her, but I always thought, what is this? What is she doing? She always sort of seemed. I could not understand what she was all about, and she seemed funny to me. And then I heard her speak, and she spoke to me, and I thought, oh shit, this woman has got some stuff going on. I would love to talk to her some more. Brian O'Shea, private investigator, March 2nd. March 8th, Dr. Merrill Nass coming on in here. And as we said, February 27th, Lauren Brobert coming in here. And Dr. Kelly Victory is working on a lot of other guests on the vaccine and COVID front, so don't worry, we still have plenty to tell you there. Anybody off the top of your head, Susan, that's coming? I know we don't have them officially on the schedule yet. Susan?
We have a long list of people, but
Yeah.
I can't think.
Viva
off the top
Fry
of
is
my head.
coming in there. There's a bunch of people that have ideas. And I was asking also that we bring back around people like Ed Dowd and
We will.
and Rish and people that we need to talk to again and see how things are changing. So keep an eye on us. Again, we're generally here at 3 o'clock, Tuesday, Wednesday,
I want to
Thursday
get Tulsi
Pacific.
back on here too.
Tulsi Gabbard in here.
Absolutely.
We actually did, next week we'll be here on Monday at 1 o'clock Pacific. Is that correct?
I don't know.
That's what it looks
Is
like to
it?
me. That's what's on the schedule. Is
Oh,
that
for
right?
Brobert. Yeah,
Yeah.
because she only had a certain
Brobert.
window of time. So we Brober.
So
How
that
do you
is
say
one
her?
Brober.
Brober.
And then
There's
we have
only
Viva
one
Fry,
R at
looks
the
like
end on her
Tuesday.
name. We'll get that
Brober.
right before she gets
Brober.
here.
And it looks like Viva Fry on Tuesday, and then I think the rest of the week we have yet to see. Well, as we said, we have. I'm not sure on the 1st. Did you put that up there already, Caleb? On the 1st, what we have there?
He's got the whole list.
No, we have the 2nd.
If
which
some of
is
them haven't been fully
Brian
confirmed,
O'Shea.
so I didn't put it on the schedule yet.
Okay, got it.
We'll
Got
know
it,
soon.
got it. March 8th is Merrill Moss. We'll check it out. We'll get something interesting for you. We'll see you then.
Ta-ta.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. If you were a chef like your father, would you be one of those chefs that yells at people and throws stuff around, that kind of thing? Or would you be just like sort of withholding and so seething?
I am a little bit more passive aggressive. For example, if somebody said something to me or asked me a stupid question, I would be like, "Do you hear yourself?" I would say stuff like that.
That's not passive aggressive. That's just aggressive aggressive.
Yeah, okay. It's passionate, Dr. Drew.
Passionate aggressive. I'm sorry. You're right. Passionate.